my name is Willow, and today I am going to be doing a book review for Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. And oh my god, I am so excited to do this review. So I recommend going into this book without knowing much about it, so I'm going to keep what it's about in the non-spoilery part of my review to a minimum, because I definitely recommend, as I said, going into this without knowing much. I definitely enjoyed it a lot more, not knowing what to really expect. I think that that really added to the reading experience of this book, and it just made it, I think it made it better, really. But basically, this book follows the path to Armageddon, I suppose, and that is definitely the biblical Armageddon. This book, I don't even want to say much more, but you follow multiple point of views, mostly the point of view of Crowley, who is on the front of this book, and Crowley is a demon, and he is friends with an angel who is called Aziraphale. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's very much one of those weird, like, Latin-y names. Anyway, it mainly follows those two characters, but mostly Crowley, which is why he's on the front cover. But it follows the journey to how they bring about, well, how Crowley and Hell bring about Armageddon up until the actual day of Armageddon. And that's all I'm gonna say. It's very vague, I know, but I'm keeping it that way because, as I said, please go into this blind and please read it. It's so good. It's funny. It's got like a very classic British dry humor, which is so excellent and so up my alley. It's so good. It almost has an urban fantasy sort of feel, but a humorous urban fantasy sort of feel, and this book was written in 1991, I believe. So despite it being over 25 years old now, it still feels quite modern, and it's just intriguing. It's such an intriguing story, and it's so interesting. And again, I don't want to say much more because, like, you really want to go into this blind, but it deals with heaven and hell and angels and demons, but it's fucking hilarious, and it's so good. It deals with humanity and, like, prophecies and like Nostradamus and stuff, but it's funny at the same time, and it's so great. There's actually going to be a TV series, I think, or maybe a movie. I think it's a TV series for it, which is so exciting. I'm definitely gonna eat that up. But yeah, I just love this so much. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I just had such a good time reading it, and that is it for my non-spoilery part of this review, which basically is me saying, read this if you haven't, but don't look up anything as to what it's about, besides, you know, angels and demons and shit. So yeah. And now we're going to move on into the non-spoilery section, where I will put the book down so I can flail my arms around and fangirl. So, first of all, let's talk about Crowley and Aziraphale. And again, I'm probably going to say his name wrong through this whole thing. Their relationship is so good. It's so good. It's so good. Oh my god. Through the whole thing, I'm like they're obviously not supposed to be friends, but they're such good friends. And it's not even that they're like, oh yeah, we're friends with each other, we're spending time with each other and all that. And there isn't really much talk of it being like super forbidden or anything, but you know it is. Because, you know, Crowley's a demon and Aziraphale is an angel, and they're working against each other, and that is the best thing. When they're working against each other with the Antichrist, and I'll get to the Antichrist later, but when they're working against each other, it's so good because they're just like, yeah, I'll do that, and then the other one's like, yeah, okay, well, I mean, I'm gonna do that, but they're not really fighting. They're just like, I mean, we have to do this, but we're still going to be friends. And I fucking love that, because there's something so hilarious about that, because they're doing their jobs, and I'm gonna get into more about Crowley doing his job later, but they're doing their jobs, but they're also, like, they're working against each other, but they're so chill about it, and I don't know why, but that just, it cracks me up, and it makes me so pleased to see that, because that's really not a kind of relationship we see often in novels, which is so fucking great. And I'm not gonna lie, I do I do kind of ship it. We're not going to talk about that, but I'm here for it. And I definitely checked if the internet was here for it, and the internet is also here for it. So, you know. And speaking of that, I love how, like, there kind of is ace representation with the Aziraphale. Like, obviously it's not super intentional or anything, but there was a bit where it said that outsiders would think he's, like, flamingly gay or something. But then it went on to say that, you know, angels don't really, like, they're ace. And I really loved that, even though it wasn't, obviously I don't think it was intentional or anything, but it's still there and I like it. Anyway, that's a tangent. I could go on 50 fucking tangents about this book. I love it so much. I feel like you can tell because I'm totally rambling a lot, but it's just as one of my favorite books of all time. It's so good, and let's move forward and try to talk about this more eloquently. Anyway, so that's what I think of their relationship. I love it so much. It's so different from what we usually get, and it's just so great. So moving on to Crowley, just on his own, I loved him a lot as a narrator and as a character because he's a demon. He's supposed to be doing bad things. You know, he's bringing the Antichrist into the world and everything, and you know, that gets fucked up, but we're gonna talk about that later. And he's doing all this shit, and he's really clever about it, especially at the beginning when he's meeting with those other two demons. And they're talking about how they got a couple people to, like, do bad things and whatever, because that's what their job is. Their job is to raise hell on Earth, which, quite punny, isn't it? Anyway, when he was talking about the fact that I think he, like, fucked with the phone lines or something and it got people, like, really rageful. And, you know, it affects, like, hundreds and thousands of people. And I was like, this guy knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He's so nonchalant about it, too. And his best friend is a fucking angel. And, you know, as you get further into the book, you're seeing that, yeah, well, for the most part, he's pretty good at his job as a demon. And I say for the most part because, you know, all the Antichrist stuff. But when you get to the end, you realize that he's doing his job, but he's not entirely doing it because he wants to. It's out of necessity as, you know, as a demon. So I don't know. I just thought that was so interesting and so cool and funny. Of course, it just made the story funny too, because there's so much you can work with that, and it was just great. So I just loved having him as a narrator and as our main character, really. It was just so good. So moving on to the Antichrist bit, and I guess the whole central plot of the story. So I found it really funny that there was the whole switch, and obviously you could see that coming. It really set it up for that, and it was so great that they were following this fucking kid called Warlock, first of all, with that nun offering names. It was so good, and I love that the actual Antichrist did end up being called Adam, and the one that they thought that it was, like, Warlock, I'm sorry, but that really cracked me up. And the whole bit with the birthday party was so good because that's when things got rolling towards Armageddon. And I feel like with stories like this, dealing with, you know, biblical things and with something as big as Armageddon, you could really go wrong in a lot of ways. And I think with this, with the humor, with the characters, with how everything played out, it was really, really cleverly done. And I really love that. And I think what I love the most about it is that it was gripping. It was interesting because you can see things build up, especially in the character of Adam, our Antichrist. You could see him, you know, becoming that typical Antichrist that you know, charismatic, a leader. But you can also see have these really horrible, culty, dictatory characteristics that, you know, turn them into the Antichrist. And I loved seeing that happen and seeing the build up, but then I think what was so great, and it wasn't even just that it was funny because there was comic relief in it. I think that it was interesting to see how, you know, you've got these little kids and one of them is almost succumbing into his powers and is almost ready to, like, fuck shit up. But then you have his friends who are like, I don't think so. Sorry, I don't think so. I don't agree with this at all. And you know, that in of itself is hilarious. But you know, when he actually gives up and is like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to do all this bad stuff. And everyone around him is like, huh? What's happening right now? It's just great because, one, it's a great moment for humanity, even though the Antichrist is a child of hell. But it's a great moment for humanity. It's a great reflection on human nature, especially when you look at it from this whole biblical lens. And I guess it is sort of taking the piss out of it. But I think it's an interesting play on that, on how, you know, humans are seen as very weak and very susceptible to otherworldly powers and things that cause destruction. You know, you see that in real life with cults and with certain, you know, modern day political movements. But in this, it's taking that and it's flipping it, and I love it. I love it so much. And you know, it flipped it in a way that was hilarious too, that totally worked with the story, but I just loved how it worked out. I keep saying I loved it, but I did. Oh my gosh. You know, you have all of this build up, all of this tension, all of this, who's gonna get there first? You know, we have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, we have Crowley, we have Aziraphale, we have the actual devil, and just everyone is there, and it's a race to get to these kids who, I don't exactly remember where, but I think it was the Midlands, which just made it even more funny to me because, one, I fucking love, like, Birmingham accents and everything, so, like, hearing them in my head was great. But also, you know, it's just plain funny, and I keep saying that, but it just is. This book is so laugh out loud hilarious. I just loved how there was so much of that really typical action and tension in the story, only for it to be not anticlimactic exactly, but not working out in the way that you entirely would think it would. And even if you guess that, it's still great to see. It's so refreshing, and as I said, it's funny. So I loved that. I loved how the plot played out. As I said, it's clever, and it worked so well. And I think the switching of the POVs was so great. You know, I definitely did miss Crowley a lot because he was my favorite point of view to read from. I found Adam's point of view really great, and his friends, and I loved reading from Anathema's point of view and Newt, and all of those, like, modern day witch hunters. That was great. I loved that. All of these characters were really quite phenomenal. They were all funny in their own sense, and they all felt like very well-built characters. Like, they all genuinely had a purpose in the story, even if it was for quick comic relief or an actual part of the plot. They all felt very necessary, and I adore that in stories, because sometimes there are characters that you're like, why are you here? With every single character in this book, you're like, yes, I love your role, you're funny, you're great, I'm here for it. And of course, it just added so much to the plot and the story. I also really like Dog, and you know, Dog isn't a character with any spoken lines or anything. He's a fucking hellhound, but I really liked how Dog, like, also the name Dog is just spot on, but I like how he interacted with Adam, and even getting into his point of view. We read from his point of view sometimes, which is so cool. So yeah, again, every character, even the fucking animals, were necessary. It was just so good. Oh, and to touch upon Newt and Anathema more, I loved how that bit sort of included the Nostradamus-y sort of prophecy bits, and I love how it tied into Aziraphale's book collection, and how there was that one rare book with all of the prophecies in it, and I just loved the prophecies too, like having them be passed down generation to generation and looking at the different interpretations that people have, and her predicting like really dumb things like car crashes and just everything. It was so interesting, and I loved like the involvement of, you know, prophecies and witches through that. It was funny and it was great, and I think it was a really clever way of including that into the plot and getting the point across. And I just loved it, and it worked so well, but I'm gonna say that about pretty much everything in this book. So, you know, actually, before I continue to ramble on forever, because I could honestly go chapter by chapter in this book and be like, oh yes, this is what I liked here, this is why it's so great for the whole plot, this is why it's hilarious, this is why it's so cleverly put in, and just a beautiful piece of writing, and I could just talk for hours and hours. So before this gets way too long and rambly, I think I have definitely exhausted everything that I really wanted to mainly talk about, because as I said, I could go into a lot of detail. I could make a whole like podcast series just about this book. That's how much I loved it, and that's how much I love thinking about it, and I really want to reread it again. Like, when I was actually reading the book, I found myself slowing down my reading because I really didn't want it to end. As soon as I got to like the 10th page, I was like, this is fucking great. I never want this world to end. I never want to leave this world. I love it so much. So, you know, I'm very excited for the TV series, and I'm sure I'll read it again at some point in my life too, because it genuinely is one of my favorite books ever now. So I loved it so much. But again, I've said that a lot. So once again, wrapping up, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of my favorites ever. I loved it so much. I just thought it was brilliant, really. If I could sum it up into one word, it's brilliant. And of course, absolutely hilarious. So thank you so much for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it is a bit of a rambly mess, but I really, really wanted to talk about this book because it's so fucking good and I love it so fucking much. So if you have read this book, let me know down in the comments. I would love to chat about it because, as I keep saying, I'm obsessed with it. So, you know, please feel free to do that. And if you would like to, you can subscribe to my channel over here and you can watch some of my other videos over here. And once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you're having a great day and I will see you soon in another video. Bye!